Gaza War Day 237. No end in sight. First of all, thank you to everyone who commented on the last video. You were all very kind and that was a lot of comments and I appreciate them all. So thank you very much. Let's get to work. We have today mainly what I want to tell you about was the leader of the Ansarallah, Abdelmalik Houthi, made a speech with some interesting notes, some interesting analysis from him. One of the leaders whose speeches I think are underrated. I don't think people pay enough attention to Abdelmalik Houthi compared to, I mean, everybody stops everything they're doing when Nasrallah speaks, which is fine as it should be. But Abdelmalik Houthi, I think, is well worth paying close attention to as well. In other news of public statements, you may have seen that the Ayatollah Khamenei sent a message to the US students. The various US politicians are very upset about it, saying things like when you've won over the when you've won over the Iranian Ayatollah, you've lost America, or something like that. So I think it's great because it's a taboo, right? I mean, there's Islamophobic, the role of Islamophobia in American society is so brutal, especially since 9/11. But going back, right? Edward Said wrote about this, Hollywood Arabs, and it goes back to before 9/11. And it has a lot to do with Israel, actually. It has a lot to do with the Israeli agenda of demonizing the Arab world and the Muslim world, because these are the targets of Zionism ultimately. And so to see just kind of taboo-free communication, direct communication like this, it's very good. It's a good thing to see. And if the more people can get over their Islamophobic indoctrination, the easier the future will be for everyone, I would say. I'll leave it at that for now. Hezbollah front. Let's get to the war. Hezbollah front active today, maybe a little bit less than two a day ago, but definitely within the normal fluctuation. They hit Kafar Shuba, Zebdin, they hit Jal al-Alam, they hit the Zarit barracks and a building in al-Manara, hitting it directly. So they're targeting Israeli military assets and hitting them directly. Oh, there was one major deal, actually. I shouldn't say it was a slow day. It was not a slow day. They hit several, they made several hits against Iron Dome batteries. So the focus on Iron Dome, on hitting and destroying Iron Dome batteries. So the resistance strategy is no longer just to saturate and thereby render ineffective the Israeli missile defense systems or rocket defense systems, depending on how you put it, which is what the Iranians did on April 14th, right? They launched just a whole bunch of different kinds of missiles at different speeds, landing at different times to overwhelm the missile defense. But the other thing that Hezbollah has started to do is to destroy Israeli missile defense batteries directly, which I think probably you might ask what's taken so long, but the depletion of the past few months must have played a role in making this possible, as well as the systematic destruction of all the surveillance equipment on the border must have played a role in making this possible. So all of these things are building up to provide new opportunities for the resistance to do new things and render new targets and attack new targets and have new successes. The Iraqi resistance launched two drones against Haifa. They claim to have hit them. Someone downed an Elbit Hermes 900 over Israeli airspace. The Israelis claim it was them. So I'm always skeptical of friendly fire. I'd encourage you to be skeptical of friendly fire claims because sometimes as much as as much as it's costly to project an image of incompetence, it's also costly to project an image that you were hit and destroyed by the enemy. So this is the kind of trade-off that the Israelis are having to make now, whether they claim something as friendly fire when it maybe may have been friendly fire, maybe it wasn't friendly fire. The West Bank has been extremely active. So the Israelis have come basically attacked the whole northern West Bank. They invaded Nablus, Qalqilia, Tubas, Tulkarm, Jenin. Now, Nablus, there's fighting, active fighting in Balata camp. This is a city with a big refugee camp kind of attached. There was also an attack by the resistance. Some lone attacker used his car as a weapon and attacked two Israeli soldiers at Awarta checkpoint, a ramming operation in Nablus, a checkpoint that exists to control Nablus. So Israel stormed Qalqilia, like I said. There was resistance. One of the tactics of West Bank resistance in particular is just to kind of open fire on a settlement or on a checkpoint and then get out of there. They don't want to get necessarily too close because the conditions of fighting the well defended settlements or checkpoints is very risky. So they take the risks that they can and still get away, as opposed to doing a very a much more risky operation to try to get close, which they do that too sometimes, but they would rather that kind of fighting at point blank range usually happens on the defense. So the resistance are defending West Bank towns or cities that the Israelis are invading, and then that's when you'll see operations against Israeli soldiers at point blank range and explosive devices, which is exactly what happened in Tubas. There was a report in Tubas of an explosive device prepared in advance, detonated, and followed by point blank fighting with Israeli soldiers. That's by Soraya al-Quds in Tubas. In Jenin, Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade. Remember, this is Fatah's armed wing. This is the armed wing of the political party that is currently running the Palestinian Authority. So the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, the armed wing of Fatah, is perfectly integrated into the military unity of the fields of this whole war, both in the West Bank and in Gaza. So the Palestinian Authority, which has been corrupted and turned into a collaborator, their own armed wing actually works quite effectively with the resistance and within the resistance, I should say. So in Jenin, Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades reports fierce clashes from zero distance, the use of a big explosive device. I saw some video of that. And the Israelis went into Jenin. They used their bulldozers and destroyed various things, and they left after 3 hours. Remember, we reported some days ago that the Israelis invaded Jenin and stayed for 46 hours before withdrawing. This last attack, they stayed for 3 hours. I mean, I don't want to identify a trend. They'll probably go back into Jenin before long and stay longer than 3 hours. However, I think there is something to the fact that the Israelis increasingly feel like they can't stay in any place for too long. Tulkarm, Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades have they released a video of a captured weapon, an M16 rifle and a pistol, and they showed the serial number because they said, and just listen to this, I won't make too much comment about it, but listen to what they said about what they did there. They said they monitored the movements of a Shin Bet, that's Israeli intelligence officer, for 10 days. They infiltrated the house and they were going to assassinate him. And they said, but the presence of an infant and two other children in his vicinity led our fighters to abort the assassination mission according to Islam. Uh, that also is one of the only believable explanations for why they don't ever attack the medical evacuation, the medevac helicopters. There's lots of footage of them observing the medevac helicopters leaving, and from up close, from where they could easily use one of their anti-tank weapons to take them out, but they don't. They let them do their medical evacuations. So, and they what they did say though, they said we have a message for Smotrich, which is one of these Israeli fanatical politicians, and they said your leaders and soldiers are under our eyes and within our range of fire. So then we have Gaza and incredibly active fighting in Gaza. The Israelis have been bombing all over. So got Barej Camp, Beit Lahia, Nuseirat, Jabalia, Rafah. So up, down, middle, everywhere. The Al-Quds released a prisoner speaking, one of their Israeli prisoners or hostages, if you prefer. Tufanov, I think is his last name, which sounds Russian. And he said, despite Israel trying their best to kill me multiple times, I'm still alive. Please get a new government because this one doesn't care about its citizens while there's still time. And then he said, I want to get back to my family. And he sent a message to his parents saying, don't live on, don't lose hope and live on and so on. But it was a video where he's basically saying like I've been abandoned by the government, and unless Israelis can change their government, their time is running out. So Jabalia, there's been fighting in Jabalia for weeks, right? When the Israelis raided Rafah, they also assaulted Jabalia. So they sent half their force or one-third of their force into Rafah, and then they sent another two-thirds up to Zaytun and Jabalia. Zaytun they withdrew from. Jabalia they've been bombing and from the air and attacking on the ground and taking a lot of damage to their armored vehicles, a lot of soldiers in so-called difficult incidents. And they announced a withdrawal, but no, they didn't announce a withdrawal. There's been a partial withdrawal from Jabalia. They're still on the outskirts of Jabalia. So it was such a withdrawal. It was so much of a withdrawal, or it was enough of a withdrawal, I should say, that people are trying to go back. So there's a couple of pictures I can show you of people trying to go back to Jabalia. There's one, you can see what it looks like there, destruction, and another one, a similar scene of destruction and lots of people trying to work their way. People were attacked from the outskirts of Jabalia by Israeli machine gunners for trying to go back. So the resistance pushed the Israelis out. The unarmed people tried to go back in, and then that was when the Israelis attacked. That was their preferred target, as always, is unarmed people. They don't like to take the losses against the resistance. So that's what happened. That's what's happening in Jabalia. I imagine it'll be this dynamic repeated for a while before the Israelis will ultimately withdraw from Jabalia too. There's other parts of Gaza City. There's also been fighting reported, field reports, and then a lot of field reports from Rafah. So Qassam reports hitting a Merkava tank in Rafah. 3 other Yassin 105, that's their anti-tank weapon, hits against Merkavas in the Yabna camp in Rafah. They said they did a whole bunch of mortar operations. There were 2 big incidents targeting an infantry patrol of 5 soldiers with a Kafaz anti-personnel explosive in Rafah, targeting 3 soldiers with an anti-personnel shell near Al-Shuka in Rafah. Al-Quds also said they hit 2 vehicles in Al-Shuka in Rafah. And then more fighting in Jabalia in Beit Lahia. So just field reports galore, hitting armored vehicles, hitting groups of soldiers inside buildings. So that war continues in Rafah. So a major, major site of operations remains Rafah, and they're still fighting in Jabalia, even as the Israelis have withdrawn from part of Jabalia, and people and are now attacking people as they try to go back to their homes. Now we can come to Yemen. I wanted to talk to you about Yemen. There was airstrikes. So first of all, I think a day or two ago, Yemen, Ansarallah announced 6 different hits against military and commercial shipping. So the commercial shipping trying to go to Israel, the American military, the American naval forces that are protecting it. So they announced hitting them with various missiles, direct hits. And I don't know if maybe the Israelis were counting on some of these ships coming in and are disappointed because they got the Americans and the British to bomb Yemen again. So the Americans and British bombed Sana'a with 6 airstrikes and 4 airstrikes against Hodeidah, both cities in Yemen, and they killed 2 people in a radio building in Hodeidah, wounded 10 journalists and staff. It's a radio building. They were killing security personnel and journalists at a radio building. So the Yemenis are attacking the hardest targets in the world, the American Navy with its anti-missile systems and destroyers and aircraft carriers. And the Americans, in response, are bombing a radio building in the poorest country in the Arab world. So the spokesman for Yemen said a response was inevitable. Another spokesman said, "We will not abandon Gaza and Palestine, even if the whole world comes and pours all its weapons on Sana'a." So that's how the people in Yemen and Ansarallah feel about getting bombed. They said some other doozies that I want to share. They said now that they've bombed, the US and UK must bear the consequences, as Yemen has been responding forcefully from the beginning and will continue its devastating and decisive response without hesitation. The hand is on the trigger. The escalation in operations and targeting is expanding and will affect larger and more significant targets. These are strategic and impactful Yemeni military operations. Continues. There are many options and significant surprises ahead. The coming days will be more momentous. It is the battle of the promised victory and the sacred jihad. This is an open war, and they have opened the gates of hell upon themselves. So he also reminded readers that, or listeners, that this is the 4th phase, which incorporates the Mediterranean. So the previous phases were incorporating the Indian Ocean, incorporating the Red Sea, and now we have preparations, they said, for phases 5 and 6. They also published statistics. Abdelmalik Houthi also mentioned some of these statistics, but there's kind of some quantitative and cumulative numbers that Ansarallah wanted people to know. That they've done 129 military operations, downed 6 airplanes. Most of these are these MQ-9 Reaper drones, 30 million apiece. So the bill is around 200 million for these downed Reaper drones now. They said they've done 1,500 military activities, targeted 129 ships, trained and prepared 338,000 soldiers, and they've done 557,000 popular activities. I'm not sure, every kind of demonstration, educational event they're keeping track of up to May 30th. Now, the last thing I wanted to share was a little bit from Abdelmalik Houthi. Among these statistics, he talked about how the same resistance point that they continue to make, which is that Israel has not achieved anything except genocide. So they're not winning the war, they're not succeeding in the war. Um, he cites an Israeli source saying the enemy admits that 21 out of 23 Hamas brigades are still operating with medium to high efficiency. He does a lot of lamenting the Arabs states that support Israel and continue to support and normalize with Israel. I saw something else, some other media figure, I think, from the Arab world that just was lamenting normalization and said nothing good ever came. Name one good thing that came out of normalizing relations with Israel. But back to Malik Houthi, he said, if Egypt moves to break relations, he talked about the violations of the Camp David Accords and how Israel has invaded this zone that's supposed to be under the control of Egypt. And he said, if Egypt moves to cut relations with Israel altogether or boycott, Yemen will stand with it and the people will stand with it. Not sure if that'll move Sisi all that much, but it's an important thing that Abdul Malik Houthi said. And then he said something really interesting about the tent massacre. He was talking about the Rafah tent massacre, the contempt that Israel showed for the international community and the international courts. But he said something really interesting. He said the practices of the Israeli enemy are an integral part of its identity, thinking, and belief. By continuously committing crimes, the Israeli enemy attempts to condition the world's peoples to accept, ignore, and overlook them. And I think that's really, really a really important point. That a lot of what they're doing, they keep crossing these taboo lines, right? Like you probably saw a photo of a baby that starved to death, and you probably saw some of these images of the Rafah tent camp massacre. It's shocking, and then they do it a couple more times. I mean, the destruction of hospitals, the targeting of hospitals was another big one. So the idea that they're doing this to condition the world's peoples to accept and ignore them is I think it's a profound observation by Malik Houthi. And the practices are an integral part of its identity, thinking, and belief. I think that's also right. I was looking out on Twitter this morning, you know how somebody once said everybody has their day as a main character on Twitter. And I think yesterday's main character on Twitter was this guy from Tablet magazine. And this was an amazing declaration of how Zionists think. He said, it's laughable to ask me as a Jew to take the side of humanity in scare quotes when humanity has abandoned us over and over again. So he's defined us, Jews, outside of humanity. And he said, why would I put humanity above myself, my interests, my family, my people, and my survival? And he goes on, where was humanity during the Holocaust? Where was humanity on October 7th? Looking away, laughing, cheering? So that's a Zionist mentality. Then he says some hoopla over how he believes the IDF, he believes every civilian death is a tragedy. That's not true. He just said he doesn't think of himself as part of humanity. But he says, I do not believe in putting everyone else above ourselves and leaving our fate in the hands of anyone else because that has always failed. So, uh, I mean, factually, the idea that Israel could do any of this stuff without unconditional support of the United States and the West is a fundamental misunderstanding of how the world works. But it's also really interesting philosophically to create a category called humanity in which there's everyone else, and then a category called Jews, and to think that it's laughable that this group would take the side of humanity in scare quotes. And then what's even more interesting is that there was a similar article from the same magazine called, it was an article in Tablet where he said, it's time we Israelis stopped pretending Israel is a state like a nation like any other. And the idea is that all you need, Israel must stop pretending. Israel must stop pretending it's a nation like any other. And then he goes through why all you need is Israeli morality and Jewish morality, and you don't need to be defensive. We need to look for standards from within our own tradition. So it's we make up the rules. It's a Superman, Supermen do what they like. This I've been saying this for a while on this channel. So there's um there's been a couple of days of this from Tablet Magazine in particular saying we are not part of normal humanity. And that's an ideology. That's the ideology that they follow. And that's the ideology that has brought us to this genocidal pass that we are in today. So I will stop there and leave you with though I'll leave you unfortunately with Tablet Magazine, but I'll repeat on the way out the Ansarallah spokesperson who said, "We will not abandon Gaza and Palestine, even if the whole world comes and pours all its weapons on Sana'a." So think about that. Think about that ethical framework. Today's been a day of ethical frameworks, hasn't it? The abandonment of the assassination in the face of seeing the presence of children, according to Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades and Tulkarm. This statement from Ansarallah, and then you can contrast it with the Zionists who said, "Why on earth would I, as a Jew, take the side of humanity?" So appalling statement there, contrasted with, a really universal perspective based on their religious framework. All right. Um, hang in there. We'll see you soon. I'll see you in the next one. It's yeah, do the usual, like and subscribe and stuff like that, and we'll be back. We'll be back soon.